All right. Well, hello, everybody. I am doing a asynchronous class meeting for us because of the hurricane. And so I'm going to extend your attendance assignment for today until Friday at 5:15. And I'm also going to extend your notebook reflection until Friday at 5:15. Please note, none of these will be due at 11:59 p.m. on Friday, 5:15 on Friday. So everything's due at the same time on Friday. I've extended that. You'll be watching this video, going through the reading materials on your own. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Be happy to help you through any of that. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today in our class was the results of our learning strategy inventory that you all did a couple of weeks ago. I have taken those results and I've put them here on the sheet, and so I want to go through them with you. So I asked each of you to fill this out. This came from the study strategies list that Sandra McGuire and her daughter put together from the book Teach Students How to Learn. And so each one of these 11 questions you all answered as either true or false, that you did these things before you went to class or during class or after class. In general. And so I'm going to go through each one of these and tell you a little bit about why these various areas are important, and then kind of give you a predictive on how this can tell you whether or not what type of grade you might make in a class. So again, this isn't set in stone, it's predictive, but I think there's some really some good advice here that you can certainly glean from this. So let's go through this. Question number 1 was, I always preview the material that will be discussed before I go to class, and 59% of you marked that as true. I think that's a bit on the low side. One of the things that you need to do before you ever go to any class is you need to preview the material. Even in Chemistry 108, you need to do the reading before you come to class. Otherwise, you have nothing upon which to scaffold your learning. Right? So think of the preview of the material before you go to class as a primer coat for your brain. Right? If you were to go out and paint a car or to paint something, you'd put a primer coat that would allow the paint to adhere well and make it look good. And the same thing happens in learning. And previewing material is one of the ways in which you can prep your brain or your mind for the knowledge that it's about to receive. So I was hoping to see this number be a little higher than 59%. But the good news is you can change. You can start to do preview of material before you go to class. It doesn't take much time to read the reading assignments before you go to a class, and it doesn't take much time to refresh your memory on that before you walk into class. And I guarantee you, if you do that when you walk away from that class, you will know more than you would if you went into that classroom cold. Question 2 was, I go over my lecture notes as soon as possible after lecture to rework them and note problem areas. This is in line with the Feynman technique in a way, right? I mean, it's very much so related to the Feynman technique in terms of being able to look at your notes, explain things simply, rework what you need to, learn more about what you're having areas in, and being able to identify those areas. 38% on this is way too low. I need to see the numbers of almost 100% on this. This is one of the key things that you can do as soon as possible after lecture. Okay, so when you leave a lecture, when you have a few minutes, you need to go through your notes as quickly as possible. And it's very important that you do it as quickly as possible because the information is still fresh in your mind. I guarantee you most of you leave a class thinking, that was easy, when you saw your professor working a problem. And then as it got cold and you went back to your notes, you couldn't quite remember a particular technique or whatever it was that they were talking about. So it's very important as soon as possible. So if you've got a time in between classes, as soon as your class is over, you need to be reviewing your notes before you go on to the next class. Okay, very, very important technique to master. I try to do my homework without using example problems as a guide or copying answers from my class notes or textbook. 78% of you mark this as true, and I'm glad to see it that high actually. Of course, we want 100% of students doing this, But this tells me that a good number of you are actually employing this this activity. Again, this is kind of tied to that Feynman technique that we learned about, right? Because you're working example problems without having a whole lot in front of you. It really does test whether or not you understand things in the simplest possible manner. Question number 4 was, I regularly go to office hours or tutoring to discuss problems or questions about the homework. Only 22% of you mark this as true. This is another problem area. Your faculty members set aside time for you every week for office hours. We have ample tutorial center opportunities on this campus that have even gone virtual during COVID. Chemistry has a tutorial center. Math has a tutorial center. The history has a tutorial lab. Physics has a tutorial lab. Biology has a tutorial lab. English has the writing center. There's the speaking center on campus. There's plenty of places for you to get help over these. You pay a substantial amount of money as collectively as students to support these activities, and yet only 22% of you are indicating that you regularly use these. You're paying for it, you might as well get the use out of it. This is where you're going to go to get the help that you need when you're not in class. Question 5 was, I rework all of my homework problems and questions before the test or quiz. Only 56% of you marked that as true. Again, it is very important for you to rework problems many times before you take a test or a quiz. Again, it's just like being prepared for an athletic event or a music event. You practice, 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 and that's how it's going to work out for you on your actual assessment. So I need to see that number move up a little bit. Question 6, I spend some time studying for this class at least 5 days a week outside of class. Only 38% of you marked that as true. I hope that's low because you were thinking about this was just for Chem 108, but this was really for all of your courses, right? You need to be spending time 5 days a week reviewing for your classes, whether that's reviewing your notes, as we talked about above, whether it's working additional problems, whether it's going to tutorial center hours or office hours that your professor may hold. You really need to be spending that time. This needs to be a regular cadence for you. In a semester, when you have your 3 or 4 classes that you're in, plus your labs, those need to be full-time commitments. That's why 12 hours is considered a full-time student. A full-time student isn't just about being in 12 credit hours, but it's also about putting in that extra time outside of class. And when you think about it, we expect roughly 2 hours of outside work for every hour of class. So if you're in 12 hours, that means that you would be spending a minimum of 24 hours outside of class. That comes to 36 hours, which is pretty close to a full-time commitment. That's why you're considered a full-time student. I make mnemonics for myself to help me remember facts and equations. 56% of you mark this as true. What does this mean? Well, we used to make up little mnemonics about things that were difficult to remember. So delta G equal delta H minus T delta S. We used to make up one where we would say delta H was like hell and minus was without, and delta TS was without tartar sauce. So we used to say that delta G, and which used to be called delta F for free energy, we used to say that fish is hell without tartar sauce, and that's how we remembered that. That's kind of a corny one. The other one that you're probably more familiar with is Leo the Lion Goes Grr, for loss is equal to oxidation, gain equals reduction, right, in terms of trying to determine whether or not something was an oxidation or reduction. You may have learned that as oil rig. Oxidation is loss, reduction is gain when you're talking about electrons. So those are little mnemonics that you can put together to help you remember facts and figures. And there is nothing wrong with using mnemonics. We use them all the time as professionals. Point 8 was I make diagrams or draw mental pictures of concepts discussed in class. 69% of you marked that as true. I'm glad to see that it was nearly 70%. You need to be able to draw pictures and understand concepts in a simple manner. Again, getting back to that Feynman technique, you've got to be able to distill it down into a one-pager. And so as you learn more and more advanced chemistry concepts, what you need to understand is that advanced chemistry concepts are nothing more than simpler concepts that you've learned before put together. Okay? And so if you understand your basics of acid-base theory, if you understand your basic reaction mechanisms, how things occur in nature, at the basic level, you're going to be able to assemble those into the more complicated versions that you'll learn about when you are in upper level courses. Question 9, I participate in a study group where we do homework and quiz ourselves on the material. Only 34% of you marked that as true. I hope this is due to the difficulties with COVID, but nonetheless, it is very, very important for you to identify good study groups right now that'll last for you for your entire time here at the University of Southern Mississippi. When I went to the University of Arkansas, which is where I got my undergraduate degree, I formed those study groups, and we stuck together for the 3 years that I was at the University of Arkansas. You build a camaraderie. You build a cohort of people you trust. You build a cohort of people that you can bounce ideas off of, and you can really work off of each other's strengths. Now, it's very, very important for you to actually build a good study group, and I can't emphasize that enough. Far too often I see students that will get together that are in the same boat, and then you're really not helping each other out. They just become sessions about where you're complaining about the coursework or the instructor or whatever the case may be. If you're struggling with a concept, you do not need to be in a study group with somebody that's struggling with that same concept. You need to be in a study group where somebody understands that concept and you understand a concept that they don't understand. This needs to be a synergistic activity. So definitely find those diverse groups and don't be the person who's just in the study group to get everything. You have to contribute. And so it's very, very important to get into a study group where you can be a contributor as well as a consumer of that experience. It's very, very important. And again, I think the ACS Student Affiliates is a great place to get started with that. Get into study groups where somebody may be a year ahead of you or a semester ahead of you in some of your courses, but you're ahead of them in other courses. And I think you'll find that things work out a lot better when you get the right study group together. And again, this study group stuff can be part of that, or it should be part of your outside commitment to your studies here, or the time that we expect you to devote to those studies. Point 10 was I rework all of the quiz test items I have missed before the next class session. I'm glad to see 75% of you agree with that. Of course, I want 100% of you to say that that is true. But you have to remember, every time you get an assessment back and you've missed something, that is an opportunity for you to learn. Okay, it's not a punishment. I promise you. It is an opportunity for you to learn. Hopefully your instructors have provided you some feedback. If they have not, go to their office hours. Go to the tutorial center. That's a perfect time for you to use those services that we offer to you at no additional charge to learn the material that you may be struggling with or haven't quite grasped yet. There's no point in going to those services if you don't have good questions. And missed questions that you had on quizzes and test items certainly makes for great places to start. There's nothing wrong with you coming in and talking to your professor and saying, I missed this question, and this is how I thought I was supposed to solve this problem. Can you help me figure out where I went wrong? And that's a great starting point. You know, as a faculty member, the world's worst thing for me is when I have a student come to my office hour and I ask them, they ask me, and they just say something like, I'm just struggling. With what? You know, we need more than that. We need to see examples of work that you've tried. Or when a student comes in and says, I just don't get it. Well, what don't you get? You got to go to the faculty member with more than that. And so those missed test or quiz items or on a paper where somebody took off a lot of points for your grammar, that's a good opportunity to go and ask them, well, why is this type of writing inappropriate for this setting? What's wrong about my grammar? You can go into those types of details pretty easily. And then, of course, the all-important question 11, I realize that I can still do well in this class even if I've done poorly on quizzes and tests up to this point. You can always improve in a course. It is very important for you to realize that you can, especially this early on in the semester. You should have gotten exams back in almost all of your classes at this point, or some type of assessment. Even though in Chemistry 108 we're not doing tests, you have assessments. I have provided some feedback, not just the grade, but I have typed comments in on some of your assignments. I had feedback for you, things for you to think about. And I'm glad to see that 84% of you marked that as true, which tells me that many of you, most of you actually, probably have a developing growth mindset, which is very, very important for success in anything that you do in life, but particularly college. So what I want you to do now is I want you to take this information. I want you to go back and look at the answers you provided. You can go back into your assignments and you can look at what you submitted for this particular Learning Strategies assignment. And I want you to think about the things that you could do to improve your performance in these areas. So if you marked false in any area, think about what you might be able to do. What concrete actions can you take tomorrow that would lead to a better performance on those things? And the reason that this is important is because the number of these items that you mark as true directly correlates to your grades in your class. It's very predictive. And so according to Dr. McGuire's book, if you, looking at this, if you go back and look at your assessment or your inventory, your strategies inventory, if you marked 9 or more of these as true, you stand a better chance of getting an A than somebody who did not. Okay, so if you're doing 9 of these things regularly, you are more likely to get an A in the class. Okay? So simply just changing some of these things from false to true, you can definitely improve your overall grades. If you answered 6 to 8 of those as true, you will likely get a B in a class. If you mark 4 to 5 of them as true, you will most likely get a C in a course. If you mark 2 to 3, you're most likely to get a D in a course. And if you marked only 1, then you're most likely going to fail a course. And so it's important that you go back and think about these things. These are things that you can do to change immediately and grow and improve and become a better student and have better performances on your exams in general. So I want you to think about it. Go back. Your notebook reflection is going to be based off of this. So before you go into that notebook reflection, you want to look this over, identify the areas that you marked as false in your original submission, and I want you to think about how you can change each and every one of those falses into trues. What could you do to motivate yourself to turn your false responses into true responses? So we'll have another video here in a moment where we're talking about the reading assignments for Wednesday. So I'm going to go ahead and end this one. Go get into your assignments and look at your learning strategies inventory and think about that notebook reflection. I hope you all stay safe during the hurricane coming through, and I will see you all next week.